Hi, my name is Sarah, and today I want to share with you a story that has resonated with thousands of people across the internet. A story about forgotten birthdays, broken promises, and ultimately, about taking control of one's own happiness. It's a narrative that speaks to anyone who has ever felt overlooked by the people who should care the most. This is the story of a daughter whose father repeatedly forgot her birthday, and how she turned years of disappointment into a powerful act of self-love and independence. Let me take you back to where it all began. Imagine growing up in a household where your birthday, that one special day that's supposed to be uniquely yours, becomes just another date on the calendar. For most children, birthdays are magical occasions filled with cake, candles, presents, and the undivided attention of loved ones. But for our protagonist, birthdays became a reminder of something far less pleasant, the realization that she wasn't a priority in her father's life. The first time it happened, she was perhaps 10 years old. She woke up that morning with the excitement that only a child can muster, dressed in her favorite outfit, and bounded down the stairs expecting to see balloons, or at the very least, a special breakfast. Instead, she found her father reading the newspaper, sipping his coffee, completely oblivious to the significance of the day. When she timidly reminded him it was her birthday, he glanced up briefly, muttered a distracted acknowledgement, and returned to his paper. There was no cake, no present, no celebration, just an awkward acknowledgement and then nothing. She told herself it was a one-off. Everyone forgets things sometimes, right? Perhaps he was stressed about work. Perhaps he had too much on his mind. Children are remarkably forgiving creatures, and so she pushed the disappointment deep down and tried to forget about it. After all, there was always next year. But next year came, and the pattern repeated itself. And the year after that. And the year after that. Each time, she would wake up with a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this year would be different. Perhaps this year, her father would remember. Perhaps this year, she would finally feel like she mattered to him. But year after year, that hope was crushed beneath the weight of his indifference. As she grew older, the forgotten birthdays became less about the absence of material gifts and more about what they represented, a fundamental lack of care, attention, and value. Other children would come to school the day after their birthdays, bubbling with excitement as they recounted the parties, the presents, the special moments with their families. She would smile and nod along, crafting elaborate lies about celebrations that never happened, too ashamed to admit the truth. What made the situation even more painful was the stark contrast in how her father treated other family members. When her brother's birthday rolled around, their father would take time off work, organize elaborate celebrations, and spare no expense on gifts. The house would be decorated. Friends would be invited. It was a proper event, the kind of birthday celebration that creates lasting memories. But when her birthday arrived, silence, forgetfulness, apathy. This disparity didn't go unnoticed. Extended family members would sometimes comment on it, though usually in hushed whispers they thought she couldn't hear. But no one ever confronted her father directly. No one ever stood up for her. The pattern was acknowledged but never challenged. She began to internalize these experiences, as children do. She wondered what was wrong with her. Why wasn't she worthy of her father's attention? Why did her brother deserve celebration whilst she deserved neglect? These questions haunted her through her teenage years and into young adulthood, shaping her self-esteem and her understanding of her place in the family hierarchy. Fast forward to her mid-20s. By this point, she had established herself professionally, worked incredibly hard, and saved diligently. She had learned to be self-reliant out of necessity. After all, when you grow up feeling like you can't depend on others for even the most basic emotional support, you learn to depend on yourself. This particular year, as her birthday approached, she found herself at a crossroads. She had saved a considerable amount of money, funds that she had been setting aside for years with no particular plan in mind. Originally, perhaps, she had thought she might use the money for a wedding someday, or for traveling, or simply as a security blanket. But now, as she approached another birthday that would inevitably be forgotten, something inside her shifted. She made a decision. If her father couldn't be bothered to acknowledge her existence on the one day of the year that was meant to be about her, then she would acknowledge herself. She would give herself the gift that no one else seemed willing to give: validation, worth, and tangible proof that she mattered. She began looking at properties, Not flats in the city, not small starter homes, but proper houses, the kind of place that represents stability, success, and independence. She found it by the lake, a beautiful, modest house with a view that took her breath away. It had a small garden, large windows that let in streams of natural light, and most importantly, it was hers. Or at least it could be. The decision wasn't made lightly. This was her life savings. This was years of careful budgeting, of saying no to luxuries, of prioritizing the future over the present. But as she stood looking at that house by the lake, she realized that this wasn't just a financial transaction. This was a declaration of independence. This was her way of saying that she was worth investing in, worth celebrating, and even if no one else would do it, she would do it for herself. She went through with it. The paperwork was signed, the mortgage was arranged, and just like that, she was a homeowner. The completion date was set for the week of her birthday. Perfect timing, she thought, though the irony wasn't lost on her. On her birthday itself, as expected, there was no call from her father, no text message, no acknowledgement whatsoever. She had stopped hopping for it years ago, but the absence still stung in that familiar way. But this time she had something else to focus on, the keys to her new home, heavy and real in her hand. She drove to her house, as the sun was setting. The lake shimmered in the golden light, and for the first time in years, she felt something that had been absent from her birthdays for as long as she could remember: joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. She took a photograph, a selfie with the house in the background, the lake visible behind it, her smile genuine and unforced. And then, in a moment that would prove more significant than she initially realized, she posted it on social media with a simple caption: "Birthday gift, self-gift." It was a statement of fact, nothing more. She wasn't trying to cause drama. She wasn't attempting to shame anyone. She was simply sharing a significant milestone in her life, as people do on social media. She was proud of herself, and she wanted to share that pride. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Within hours, her phone began buzzing with notifications. Comments flooded in, some congratulatory, but many from family members who seemed personally offended by her post. Her father, who hadn't bothered to wish her a happy birthday, suddenly had plenty to say. "How dare she be so selfish?" came his first message. "Using all her savings on a house without even consulting the family? What if there's an emergency and we need money?" The audacity of it took her breath away. Here was a man who couldn't remember her birthday, who had made her feel invisible for decades, suddenly demanding consideration and consultation. Here was a man who had never invested emotionally in her, suddenly feeling entitled to have an opinion on how she invested financially in herself. But it wasn't just her father. Other family members chimed in, each with their own variation of disapproval. "You should have saved that money for your future husband," an aunt commented publicly on the post. "What man wants a wife who's already spent all her money on herself? This is so irresponsible," added a cousin. "Property is a burden. You should have kept that money liquid. What were you thinking?" Her brother, the one who had enjoyed elaborate birthday celebrations year after year, sent a private message saying that their parents were really upset and that she had embarrassed the family. Couldn't she have been more discreet about this? The common thread through all of this criticism was fascinating in its consistency. They weren't upset that she had bought a house. They were upset that she had done it for herself, without seeking permission, without considering how it might affect them, without playing the role they had assigned to her. The role of the daughter who existed in the background, who didn't make waves, who accepted her position in the family hierarchy without complaint. Let's take a moment to examine this outrage, because it reveals something profound about family dynamics and societal expectations, particularly regarding women and financial independence. Firstly, there's the patriarchal assumption that a daughter's financial decisions should be subject to paternal approval. Despite being an adult with her own income, despite having earned and saved that money herself, the expectation was that she should have consulted her father before making such a significant purchase. This expectation doesn't typically extend to sons. Her brother certainly hadn't been required to seek permission for his financial decisions. But for a daughter, the rules were different. Secondly, there's the notion that a woman's resources should be preserved for future family use, rather than invested in herself. The comment about saving money for a future husband is particularly telling. It presumes that her primary purpose is to eventually become someone's wife, and that her financial decisions should be made with that eventuality in mind. The idea that she might want to invest in her own security, her own happiness, her own future, independent of a man, was apparently offensive. Thirdly, there's the issue of visibility. Her brother had posted countless photos of his birthday celebrations, his achievements, his purchases. No one had ever accused him of bragging or being inappropriate. But when she shared her achievement, suddenly it was showing off and embarrassing the family. This double standard speaks volumes about who is allowed to take up space, who is allowed to celebrate themselves, and whose accomplishments are deemed worthy of public acknowledgement. And finally, there's the most bitter irony of all, the sudden attention. For years, she had been ignored, overlooked, forgotten. But the moment she did something for herself, the moment she demonstrated that she didn't need their validation or approval, suddenly she had their full attention. Suddenly, her father had time to craft lengthy messages of disapproval. Suddenly, the family had opinions about her life. Where was this attention on her actual birthday? Where was this engagement when she was a child, hopping for even a fraction of this interest? As the criticism poured in, she found herself experiencing a complex mixture of emotions. Part of her had expected this reaction. After all, she knew her family well enough to anticipate their disapproval. But another part of her had harbored a small, foolish hope that perhaps this accomplishment would finally earn their respect, their admiration, their acknowledgement that she was capable and worthy. Instead, the reaction confirmed what she had always suspected but had tried to deny. In her family's eyes, she would never be quite enough. She could work hard, save diligently, make responsible decisions, and achieve significant milestones, and still it wouldn't be the right thing. She would still be criticized. She would still be found wanting. The forgotten birthdays, she realized, were just the symptom. The real issue was much deeper, a fundamental lack of respect for her as an individual. To her father and much of her extended family, she wasn't a person with her own dreams, goals, and autonomy. She was a role, the daughter, the niece, the cousin, and roles are meant to be performed according to specific scripts. By deviating from that script, by asserting her independence and celebrating herself, she had violated an unspoken contract. This realization was painful, but it was also liberating. For years, she had blamed herself. She had wondered what she could do to earn her father's attention and approval. She had tried being quieter, more accommodating, less demanding. She had tried being the perfect daughter, hoping that perfection might finally be enough. But now she understood. It was never about her behavior. It was about their inability to see her as a complete person. Amidst the family criticism, however, something unexpected happened. Friends, people who weren't bound by the complicated ties of family obligation, began flooding her post with supportive comments. "This is incredible," wrote a former colleague. "You should be so proud of yourself. Buying a house on your own is a massive achievement. Don't listen to anyone who tries to diminish this," added a university friend. "You've worked hard for this and you deserve to celebrate it. Congratulations." "I'm so inspired by this," commented someone she barely knew, a friend of a friend. "I've been saving for years but felt guilty about spending money on myself. Your post reminded me that investing in ourselves isn't selfish, it's necessary." These messages came from people who understood what she had accomplished because they weren't clouded by family politics or outdated expectations. They could see the achievement for what it was: a young woman taking control of her financial future, making a wise investment, and having the courage to celebrate herself when no one else would. The post began to gain traction beyond her immediate circle. It was shared, commented on, discussed. People related to different aspects of the story, some to the forgotten birthdays, some to the family criticism, some to the act of self-gifting as a form of empowerment. The narrative resonated because it touched on universal themes: the struggle for parental approval, the courage required to forge your own path, the satisfaction of self-reliance. Strangers shared their own stories of forgotten birthdays, of family members who only paid attention when they had criticism to offer, of the liberating moment when they stopped seeking validation from people who were determined never to give it. A community formed around her story, a community of people who understood that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is gift yourself the love and recognition that others withhold. A few days after the initial outburst, her father called her, not to apologize, mind you, but to explain. In his mind, he had done nothing wrong. The forgotten birthdays, he had been busy, stressed, preoccupied with important matters. Surely she understood. She was an adult now, she shouldn't need her father to remember her birthday. Wasn't that childish? The house purchase. Well, that was irresponsible. What if property values declined? What if she lost her job and couldn't pay the mortgage? He was only expressing concern because he cared. Never mind that this care had been notably absent throughout her childhood and young adulthood. And that post, that public display, that was the real issue, he claimed. If she had bought the house quietly without announcing it to the world, without that pointed caption about self-gift, perhaps he wouldn't have been so upset. It was the public nature of it that embarrassed him. It made him look bad, he said, as though he had neglected her somehow. She listened to his justifications with a strange sense of detachment. She recognized the patterns now, the deflection, the reversal of victim and perpetrator, the way he centered his own feelings whilst dismissing hers. This conversation, she realized, wasn't about reconciliation or understanding. It was about reasserting control, about making her feel guilty for daring to step outside the role he had assigned her. When he finished speaking, there was a long pause. In the past, this is where she would have apologized. She would have said that he was right, that she was sorry, that she should have been more considerate. She would have smoothed things over, made herself smaller, accepted the blame for his discomfort. But this time, standing in her new home, looking out at the lake that now formed part of her daily view, she found herself saying something different. "Dad," she said quietly but firmly, "you forgot my birthday. Again. You've forgotten it for years. And now you're upset because I gave myself the gift that you never bothered to give, acknowledgement that I matter. I'm not going to apologize for that." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. That conversation marked a turning point. For the first time in her life, she began setting boundaries with her family. She stopped accepting the role of the forgotten daughter, the one who was supposed to be grateful for scraps of attention whilst watching others feast on full celebrations. She made it clear that she would no longer tolerate the double standards. If her brother could post about his achievements without being called selfish, then so could she. If her father didn't have time to remember her birthday, then she wouldn't make herself available at his convenience when he suddenly needed something. This didn't mean cutting off contact entirely, though she considered it. Instead, it meant recalibrating the relationship to reflect reality rather than the fantasy she had held onto for so long. She stopped expecting her father to change, to suddenly become the parent she had always needed. That expectation had caused her pain for decades. Letting it go was surprisingly freeing. She also became more selective about family events. Previously, she had attended every gathering, every celebration, desperate to be included, to feel like part of the family. Now, she attended only those events she genuinely wanted to attend. If being there would bring her joy, she went. If it would simply be an exercise in feeling invisible and undervalued, she politely declined. The family didn't take this well initially. There were accusations of her being difficult and holding grudges. Her brother called her dramatic. Her aunt said she was tearing the family apart, but she stood firm. She had spent enough years contorting herself to fit into spaces that were never designed to accommodate her. She was done with that. Interestingly, her act of self-affirmation had unexpected ripple effects. Other women in her life, cousins, colleagues, friends, began sharing their own stories of being overlooked, undervalued, and taken for granted by family members. They spoke of birthdays forgotten, achievements dismissed, dreams belittled. Many of them had never connected these individual incidents into a larger pattern the way she had. They had accepted each forgotten birthday as an isolated incident, each dismissive comment as just a bad day, each double standard as just the way things were. But her story helped them see the pattern, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Several women in her life were inspired to make their own declarations of independence. One cousin finally pursued the career change she had been putting off because her parents disapproved. A colleague bought herself an expensive piece of jewelry she had been admiring for years, despite her mother's protests that it